Now that we've taken unstructured observations and turned them into structured data, we need to store that data somehow in our computer. And we can do that utilizing the tabular model, which is a basic structure for organizing related data values in a matrix. You do that by arranging the data in columns and rows and storing the data in cells. Now, database professionals or GIS professionals, we often refer to those columns as fields, which represent an attribute for a collection of entities. So in the example on the right, you can see the first row lists the field names, and each field name represents an attribute of these offices for an organization. For example, the city attribute or field or column represents where those offices are located. Now, each row represents a record in the table and represents the attributes for a single entity. So a single office, like the office that is managed by Con, is a sales office in Dallas at 75210 zip code. Now, a cell is where we store our data values, and all values in the field are the same data type. So, for example, everything that's stored in the zip field happens to be a zip code, or everything in the city happens to be a text value that represents the city. One of the most common softwares utilized to store tabular data are spreadsheets. And so this semester, we'll be utilizing Google Sheets to explore the tabular model. Now, Google Sheets is really great because if you have a Gmail account, you have access to Google Sheets. It's very easy to use. You can see the interface in front of you there at the very top of your screen. This is where the title of your Google Sheets file is stored. And if you look at the bottom, Google Sheets is a spreadsheet, and so you can store multiple sheets or multiple tabs in a single spreadsheet. You also notice the menu section right here where you can access functionality in the software and the toolbar as well. And then you can see here are the columns, right? And here are the rows or the fields in the records in which you can store values. The last thing I want to point out on this slide is the formula bar up here. The formula bar shows you what is in each cell. So if you highlight a cell in your spreadsheet, then you'll see what is in that cell in the formula bar. Now let's review the performance criteria for this topic. What is data? You should now be able to explain the relationship between data, information, and knowledge. Data is a collection of observations. Information is when we turn those observations into facts, and knowledge is when we can sort out the relevant from the non-relevant facts and describe the connections between those facts so that we can better understand the underlying data. You should know how to define data, the root of which means fact, and data is also referred to in the plural as a collection of facts. You should be able to differentiate between primary and secondary data. Primary data is data that you collect. Secondary data is data that you get from some other source. So if I go out with my cell phone and I measure sound, I am collecting primary data. But if I go to the web and I download a sound file that somebody else has created, that is secondary data. You should be able to explain nominal, ordered, interval, and ratio data types, or what we refer to as NUAR. Nominal are named data types. Ordered are named and ordered. Interval are named, ordered, and placed on a measured scale with no absolute zero. And ratio data type are named, ordered, placed on a measured scale, and they have an absolute zero, which means there's zero of it when you get to zero. So if we apply weather, right, nominal might be climate, wet, cold, for example, or hot. Ordered might be temperature, so hot, mild, cool. Interval might be temperature in degrees or Celsius. So it's nominal, it's named, it's ordered, right? 100 is much greater than 50. And then it's interval, which means that there's no absolute zero. When I get to 0 degrees, that's actually a temperature. And last is ratio data types. An example relative to weather is wind speed. So when I have 50 miles per hour, that's one wind speed, but when I get down to zero, there's no wind left. Last, you should be able to describe how tables are structured in columns that represent fields, in rows that represent records, and the individual cells that represent the values of the data that is stored in the table.